What happens when one of Hollywood's most revered and most respected actors is scheduled for what is expected to be a simple feel-good interview, and it instead starts to take a turn no one saw coming? What actually goes down? In a room packed to the rafters of Studio 1 Ampere, an uncomfortable electricity was already building as Denzel Washington sat down across from the panel of The View to plug a movie that was about to quickly become the backdrop for something far less predictable than promotional chatter. And what resulted would become one of the most memorable and debated daytime TV interview moments in recent memory. But before we get into the juicy details, make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below with what you think was really going on, because this moment was more complex than it seems. First, let's set the stage properly before everything goes awry. On the surface, it looked like any other morning at the View Studios. Denzel Washington arrived earlier than expected, cool and gracious, as always, chatting easily with the crew. His professionalism and charm, the very things that make him so beloved in the industry. He was there to discuss a deeply personal project he'd been crafting for years. A directorial piece about a young man in the 60s breaking barriers to become the first in his family to go to college. A story meant to be about overcoming odds, fueled by resilience, hope, and transformation. Across the room, however, the vibe was different. While some of the panel members seemed to be geared up for a pretty standard promotional chat, reports suggest Joy Behar came to the show that day with something else entirely on her mind, notes in her hand, and what she considered to be more hard-hitting and more provocative questions, ready to create sparks and push the narrative beyond its comfort zones. When the cameras finally rolled, the other hosts were polite, respectful, even fawning. Whoopi Goldberg warmly introduced him, showering him with accolades and singing the praises of his extensive filmography and humanitarian work, setting a tone that was as smooth and celebratory as could be. For a moment, everything seemed so natural, so comfortable, as Denzel was genuinely lighting up as he talked about his film, expressing his heartfelt passion for working with the young talent and bringing this deeply personal story to life. But behind the scenes and beneath the surface of this easy conversation, a subtle shift was occurring, and Joy Behar was no longer just listening, because at this point things took a sharp left turn. As Denzel was just finishing up a passionate comment about working with the younger generation, he was suddenly cut off mid-sentence by Joy, who interjected with a question that immediately altered the room's entire dynamic. The soft, comfortable tone of the interview evaporated in an instant as the conversation abruptly pivoted to more controversial ground, as she then pointedly raised concerns about Hollywood's lack of diversity and asked what she implied was an implicit bias allowing certain actors like Denzel to bypass some of the hurdles that others face due to factors like their race. A sudden hush fell over the room. You could almost feel the discomfort in the air as the other hosts shared concerned glances with each other, clearly caught completely off guard by the sharp shift in intensity. Denzel Washington, ever composed, held his gaze, his expression unreadable. But you could tell the moment wasn't lost on him, and with cool precision he began to respond, making it clear he wasn't going to let the comment go unaddressed. "Are you seriously saying that after over 3 decades of work, training at Fordham and American Conservatory Theater, and giving my all to every role I've ever been a part of, that none of it was legitimate?" Joy pressed, her voice hardening, as if she had stepped forward from interview to confrontation. "I'm not saying illegitimate," she continued, unyielding, "but you can't deny the fact that Hollywood is under diversity pressure now. There are quotas and expectations. Doesn't that mean that a role like yours come to you with advantages that other people don't get?" The energy in the studio had been completely reoriented. What had felt like a cozy daytime talk show was now electric and tense, the audience shifting, and the other hosts exchanging anxious glances to try and get involved in time to de-escalate the confrontation. Whoopi Goldberg attempted to jump in, but Joy was not going to give the moment any breathing room. "And let's be frank," she added, "when you won your Oscar for Training Day, was it for your performance or because the industry was trying to make up for past injustices?" Very slowly, deliberately, Denzel set his coffee cup down. He raised his eyes, and while his expression remained placid, the gentle intelligence within his gaze had hardened to a fierce determination. "Joy, I want to be clear about what it is you are implying," he said, with perfect evenness. "Are you telling me my Oscar wasn't earned, that the Academy didn't think my performance was the best, but gave me the Oscar out of charity?" Joy blinked, and for the first time her bravado faltered as she stammered, "I'm just asking what so many people are thinking, the merit debate, the diversity issue. Viewers at home want to hear your thoughts on whether your success had something to do with race." Around the table, the discomfort was undeniable. Sarah Haynes glanced down while Sunny Hostin looked as if she were about to attempt to reroute the entire conversation herself. Denzel, however, was not yet finished. "Let me be absolutely clear with you, Joy," he began, his voice just slightly elevated to cut through the nervous silence of the studio, while still remaining completely controlled. I have never in my entire life asked for anything because of my race. Every audition, every job, every single performance has been because of my talent, my work, and my merit. And for you to come on this show and in front of an audience of millions, suggest otherwise is not only disrespectful to me, it's disrespectful to every black actor who has had to claw for recognition in this industry. Joy, perhaps sensing she had crossed a line, was no less emboldened. I am not being disrespectful, Denzel, but these are legitimate questions to ask, she responded with a defiant tilt of her chin. If we can't have an open conversation about race and opportunity, then why are you here today? I thought you were someone who embraced honest debate. That last sentence hung in the air like a dry twig about to catch fire. The studio fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of years, deliberately controlled and undeniably authoritative. Joy, let me give you a little lesson in asking a tough question, he started. A tough question demands examination, it demands reflection, it demands truth from someone. What you are doing is not tough. That is, you're confirming stereotypes and labeling it journalism. Denzel declared, the words delivered with a quiet precision that cut through the room like a shard of ice and immediately changed its temperature. Joy's face flushed, genuinely unsettled. She'd been prepared for anger, maybe an outburst, something she could frame. But Denzel wasn't falling for it. He was dissecting her words and every syllable she used. I think you're being overly sensitive, Joy countered, trying to regain control as her tone sharpened. This is The View. We ask hard questions. We don't coddle people just because they're famous. If you're uncomfortable, maybe you're not the man for this interview. The response in the studio was immediate. A palpable wave of disbelief rolled through the audience, gasps echoing in the studio as whispers and murmurs began to spread. Whoopi Goldberg looked visibly taken aback while the other hosts exchanged nervous glances, already sensing that this was no longer an interview, but a powder keg waiting to detonate. Denzel leaned forward, and for the first time the focus of the entire room felt like it narrowed and locked onto him. Scrutiny? He repeated, his voice calm but firm. You call questioning the validity of my entire career scrutiny? He didn't raise his voice, but it somehow felt heavier. I've been acting in this business longer than most people in this room have been alive. I've worked with directors like Spike Lee, Tony Scott, Frank Capra. I've stood next to some of the greatest actors in history, and you're saying all of it has been filtered through my skin color instead of my skill. Joy tried to push back her own certainty, clearly beginning to waver. That's not what I'm saying, she replied, but the sharpness of her tone had lost its edge. I'm asking questions people in America are asking. Isn't it better to face them head-on instead of pretending they don't exist? Denzel tilted his head slightly, focusing on her choice of words. People in America, he echoed. Or is it just you, Joy? Because I'm hearing something that doesn't sound like inquiry, it sounds like assumption, and you're hiding behind the collective public to make yourself feel comfortable saying it. The comparison that followed landed with the force of a seismic shock. When white actors win awards, do you ask them if it was a quota system that did it? When Brad Pitt took home his Oscar, did you wonder if it was merit or a move to correct something? The studio exploded with reaction as audience members nodded emphatically, their reactions mirroring the open acknowledgement, and Joy sat in stunned silence. Sunny Hostin quickly leaned forward, sensing that the situation was spiraling beyond control. Maybe we should bring it back to the film, she suggested, hoping to guide the conversation back to a less incendiary topic. But Joy wouldn't back down, seemingly determined to stand her ground regardless of the consequences. Denzel, I've been doing this for years, she continued, leaning forward as she spoke. I've interviewed world leaders, presidents, everyone. I know how to ask the questions that get to the truth. And the truth is that Hollywood has changed. There are opportunities available to people now that didn't exist before. And then his face softened almost imperceptibly, his voice rising just a little to cut through everything but still holding its calm control. The truth, he repeated slowly, the studio leaning forward, holding its breath. Joy, can I tell you something about the truth? Denzel stated, his voice, which had once been level, now possessed a gravitas that subtly made everyone in the studio lean forward. The truth is, I was walking into rooms asking for Malcolm X, and they said I wasn't the right look to play a black historical figure. The truth is that for years I was pushed towards characters who were either criminals or background props or stereotypes that other people dreamed up for me to play. And the truth is I've had to work twice as hard, I've had to prepare twice as hard and deliver twice as good, just to get the benefit of the doubt. He paused, allowing a silence long enough to feel the impact of each word to sink into everyone in the studio. Then and now you want to sit here and tell me all of this has come to me easy, that it hasn't been earned? That's not tough questioning, Joy. That's you restating assumptions that I have spent my entire career proving wrong. The studio had been transformed from one that buzzed with excitement to one that felt electrically charged with tension. Joy, whose face had started to become flushed, was visibly losing her confidence, but instead of backing down, she pushed further, as if defeat were no longer a possible outcome. "I don't think you're misinterpreting my questioning." Joy's tone was sharp but rapid-fire. "I never said you've had it easy, but you cannot disregard the fact that we are in an era where Hollywood is pushing the idea of diversity, and diversity has opened up doors which prior to that did not exist." The sentence lingered for just a second too long. Denzel stood slowly, and the atmosphere shifted dramatically from a talk show segment to a pivotal moment in time. A moment where the studio had shrunk to size around him. "Joy," he stated, his tone deepening to something far more commanding than ever before. "I got my first Oscar nomination in 1987 for Cry Freedom. This was 2 decades before diversity was a word you even heard in a boardroom in Hollywood." He held her gaze. "Every success that I have had existed long before this notion you want to try and pin on them." The studio audience and the rest of the cast sat in absolute stillness. Whoopi shook her head almost imperceptibly, visibly discomforted. Sarah just stared down. "All I am asking is it invalid to question the intersection of race and career success within the context of Hollywood?" Joy stated, desperately clinging on to what she felt was common sense. "That's not controversial. That is an honest question." Denzel let out a short, almost disbelieving chuckle, and he began to shake his head. "Is that honest?" he questioned her back. "Joy, that is not the description of an honest question. That is me listening to you impose an assumption that is designed to minimize all of the work I've put in." He then tilted his head slightly, his gaze shifting to the camera and beyond. "To everyone at home listening, this is what happens when a reporter mistakes antagonism for journalism and controversy for truth." The studio was suddenly dense with that tension, and in spite of everything, Joy fired back. "I resent the fact that I'm not professional. I've been doing tough questions for years, long before you were a household name." And then the whole game changed, and Denzel turned back to her slowly, his gaze steady, a hint of the chilling power that always lies beneath that calm demeanor. "Long before I was a household name," he repeated, each word like a warning. "Joy, I was already receiving theater awards before you knew what you wanted to do," Denzel said. And the room, now a tight knot of tension, fell instantly silent as his voice, deceptively calm, cut through the studio. "I was studying Shakespeare at Juilliard while you were doing stand-up, and you're questioning my ability? I know my filmmakers better than anyone." Immediately the entire room went deathly quiet, so silent it was almost unnatural, as even the camera crew seemed to hold their breath. It was undeniable. Denzel's quiet temper had just snapped. But it wasn't an outburst. It was more like the drawing of an impossible line. "I came here today to discuss a project with you that means a great deal, something I think could inspire millions, or at least young people who are struggling to find their path in life. And you, Joy, have reduced it to an attack on my integrity, my career, and my integrity. And that tells us all we need to know about this conversation." Joy, not knowing quite how much she had crossed a line but unwilling to give up, decided to press. "I don't know why you're so sensitive, Denzel," she said, her voice still relatively calm, although edged with irritation now. "It's television. It's supposed to be a little controversial. That makes good content. It's what audiences respond to." As soon as the words left her mouth, the entire room visibly braced. There was no doubt. She had never been so wrong. Denzel's whole face changed. Instead of the simmering fury from before, there was a cold, sharp sense of disappointment. "Good TV," he repeated, barely audible, as if trying to process what exactly this conversation had devolved into. He looked up, then, his eyes not angry but cool and clear. "You want to know what good TV is, Joy?" His voice had become a little softer, but the sheer force of his conviction remained. "Good TV informs and educates and lifts people up. It exposes truth and doesn't use people's reputations as fuel. You, Joy, are just using me as a tool. Good TV does not belittle others, and the fact that you've turned this conversation into this speaks volumes more about where you're coming from than where I'm going." He took a small step forward, and suddenly the air felt even tighter as the studio seemed to shrink around him. "Do you think my years of research, my discipline, and my dedication is content, Joy? Do you think this kind of vicious attack makes you a journalist? That's not journalism, that's pure tabloid garbage." Joy's facade continued to crumble as she shot back, her voice brittle. "Denzel, I've been in this business for 20 years. I know what works, I know what the audience likes. They like a good interview, they want something real. They don't want an actor gushing over how much they love his last film, they want the real story." Denzel let out a quiet, almost mournful shake of his head. "Real story?" he said slowly. "Joy, you wouldn't know a real conversation if it sat right down on that sofa in front of you and gave you its whole life story." The room seemed to tighten further as he concluded. "A conversation requires an exchange. You have to listen as well as speak. You have to come from a place of respect and curiosity, not from a desire to break someone down. Today was not a conversation, it was a mugging. At this moment, Whoopi Goldberg tried to intervene, seeing that the atmosphere was so charged, perhaps fearing that things had escalated too far. I think maybe we should just, she began, but Joy quickly interrupted. I'm not going to apologize for doing my job, Denzel, Joy said, her voice increasing with an attempt to reclaim the space in a studio rapidly getting out of hand. If you can't take a push, perhaps live TV isn't your medium. The instant the words left her mouth, something about the room changed. It wasn't tension anymore, it was shock. It was so profound, even Joy looked like she'd realized it a split second too late, like she'd gone over a cliff without realizing it, until she was already plummeting. Denzel said nothing for a moment, just staring at her, allowing the silence to linger, then slowly nodded, as though something had finally clicked. You are correct about one thing, he stated in an unnervingly low tone. I should probably reconsider conducting interviews like these, because what I witnessed here today was unadulterated incompetence. He then shifted to the side to acknowledge the others at the table, a subtle turning of his back on Joy but still facing his audience. Whoopi, ladies, he said, his tone softening ever so slightly enough to show recognition. I'd like to apologize. This is not why any of us came to be here. You asked me as a guest and I have respect for this venue. The shift made the room feel even more pressurized than it already did. He turned back to Joy, a fire in his eyes, something cold and final in his gaze. But what you did today, he said, his tone unwavering, yet packed with the moral weight of judgment, was abominable. You used your platform in front of millions to spread the false message that black successful artists only got to where they are through some contrived notion of being a charity case. You questioned my legitimacy, my professionalism, my respectability. Joy attempted to cut him off, but his voice didn't waver. Don't, he snapped, his gaze fixed on her, freezing her mid-sentence. Don't try to twist this around. Everyone in this studio, everyone at home just heard you. Every single one of them. He didn't blink. You questioned the authenticity of my Oscar. You implied I was only considered because of diversity initiatives. You even insinuated that my success wasn't truly earned. He turned directly to the camera, and now addressed the outside world, a shift in the focus from within the studio to out of it. This is what systemic racism in the media looks like, when it's laid bare. Sometimes it doesn't even announce itself. It sits behind a desk with a microphone and calls itself news. A palpable stillness fell over the studio. The tension evaporated, replaced by a thick, unreal silence. Joy's face had paled. Her previous confidence had melted away, replaced by the crushing weight of realization. You asked if I can handle tough questions, Denzel said, his voice soft now, but with all the force he could muster as he turned back to her. Well, let me ask you this. How does it feel knowing you've just become the very thing you were arguing against? The words landed in the silence, piercing and undeniable. Joy's answer was hesitant and meek. I was only trying to have an open conversation about, she said. Denzel didn't let her finish. About what? He countered instantly. About whether I deserved my success? About whether the Academy got it wrong? About whether directors like Spike Lee or Tony Scott were only giving me chances because they felt sorry for me? He slowly shook his head, disappointment seeping into his tone. If you want to discuss race in America, he said, his voice dropping as the studio held its collective breath, then let's talk about it, Denzel said, his voice even and firm, yet cutting through the studio with unmistakable clarity. Let's talk about what it really means for a black man with an established career who can't appear on a talk show without having to have his entire life and work dissected. Let's talk about what makes some people so uncomfortable with black excellence they have to explain it away instead of just accepting it for what it is. The other co-hosts remained speechless, as frozen as statues, witnessing a moment of television history that had unfolded in ways no one could have predicted. The audience was no longer chattering, but locked in listening, as if the room had become a living exhibit of human evolution in real time. You know what the core issue is here, Joy? He went on, his tone softening to something almost mournful. Today was an opportunity to have a real substantive conversation about film, about storytelling, about representation, and you reduced it to a televised spectacle of accusation and insinuation. With the measured precision of a man who had lived with respect as his mantra for decades, he began unbuckling his mic pack. I have been working in this industry for more than 40 years. I have faced every manner of obstacle that can be put in front of a black man working to succeed in a profession that hasn't always had open arms for people like me. Some obvious, some insidiously covert, and some so blatant you have to be willfully blind not to see them. And in all those years, one thing has become abundantly clear. I don't let anyone undermine my existence in real time while I stand by and take it. Joy's attempt to interject was softer, now almost frantic. Denzel, please. I think there's been a misunderstanding. But he immediately shook his head. No, he responded with finality. There has been no misunderstanding. Her response was met with a silence so profound it felt like the sound of the studio itself exhaling. You showed me who you are today, and I am showing you that I do not engage in situations where respect isn't the common currency. He handed the still stunned production assistant his mic pack. The gesture slow and deliberate, then turned back to face Joy once more. What do you think makes good television? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It's not this. It's treating another person with dignity and grace. Something you chose not to do today in this space. He turned then and walked toward the exit of the set. Denzel pleased. Whoopi's voice echoed through the sudden emptiness. He paused at the edge of the stage and looked back, a subtle shift in his expression for his fellow panelists. Whoopi, this isn't about you, he said evenly. It's about basic human decency. It is as simple as that. And with that he was gone. The studio sat still in shock as the cameras continued to roll, capturing Joy's speechless posture as the enormity of the moment, what had been intended as a standard promotional interview, became profoundly clear, and the entire nation witnessed it live,